This is Isadora Sterling.
Look at this.
At just 17 years old, she was living every parent's nightmare disguised as a dream. Born into billions, raised in marble hallways, she had every tutor money could buy. Yet in the classroom, she was drowning. 3 years of failing grades. 3 years of disappointing the richest man in Texas. 3 years of proving that all the money in the world couldn't fix what was broken inside her brilliant mind. But everything changed when the man mopping the floors became the only one who could unlock the genius everyone said didn't exist. What happens when a janitor with a secret past becomes the key to saving a billionaire's legacy? Grab your coffee and settle in, because this is the story of how one conversation in a Texas library shocked an entire family and redefined what it means to be truly wealthy. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. This story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about success. The polished marble floors of Sterling Academy gleamed under crystal chandeliers, but 17-year-old Isadora Sterling felt like she was walking through quicksand. Her navy blazer with its gold-trimmed crest felt heavier with each step toward the dean's office. Another failed test. Another disappointed phone call to her father. Another reminder that being Chief Sterling's daughter meant nothing if you couldn't perform. Miss Sterling, your standardized scores are concerning. Dean Holloway had said that morning, sliding the paper across his mahogany desk like it was contaminated. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a less demanding institution. The words echoed in her head as she pushed through the library doors that evening. The massive room was empty except for the soft yellow glow of study lamps and the distant sound of someone humming, probably the cleaning staff. Isadora collapsed into a chair at the far table, pulling out her physics textbook. The equations blurred together like hieroglyphs, mocking her with their complexity. "Why can't I see it?" she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "Why can't I be smart like he wants me to be?" That's when she noticed him. The man in dark blue coveralls and bright yellow cleaning gloves, methodically working his way through the room. She'd seen him before, always quiet, always invisible. Just another part of the Sterling Academy machinery that kept her world running smoothly. But tonight, something was different. As he approached her table, she caught him glancing at her open textbook. His hands, still in those rubber gloves, paused mid-wipe. His eyes, intelligent, focused eyes that didn't belong to a simple janitor, locked onto the physics problem that had been torturing her for hours. "You're approaching it wrong," he said quietly. So quietly she almost didn't hear him. Isadora looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" The man, Caspian, according to his name tag, set down his cleaning supplies and pointed to her notebook. "That equation. You're trying to solve it like a math problem. But it's not math, it's architecture. It's a blueprint." Something in his voice, the certainty, the way he spoke like someone who understood not just the answer but the very soul of the question, made her listen. "What if I told you there's a secret?" Caspian continued, pulling off one yellow glove to reveal hands that had clearly held more than mops. "One secret that could change everything you think you know about learning?" In the distance, footsteps echoed in the hallway. The sound of expensive leather shoes on marble. The kind her father wore. The kind that meant power, money, and expectations she could never meet. But for the first time in 3 years, Isadora Sterling felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. "Tell me," she whispered, and that's when everything changed. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The Sterling mansion sat on 47 acres of manicured Texas landscape, its limestone walls gleaming white against the endless blue sky. From the outside, it looked like a fortress of success. Inside, 17-year-old Isadora Sterling felt like a prisoner serving a life sentence for the crime of being ordinary. "Your father expects the Sterling Academy report by noon," Margaret, their head housekeeper, announced as she set down Isadora's breakfast. Steel-cut oats, fresh berries, and organic honey arranged on bone china that cost more than most people's cars. Isadora pushed the food around her plate, her stomach churning. The report. Another collection of disappointing grades that would earn her another lecture about Sterling standards and family legacy. Chief Sterling didn't just own the largest tech empire in Texas, he was Texas tech royalty. And his only daughter couldn't even pass a basic calculus exam. Miss Isadora? Margaret's voice softened. You barely touched your food yesterday either. I'm not hungry, Isadora whispered, staring at her reflection in the polished marble table. Dark curls framed a face that looked like her mother's, the mother who died when Isadora was 7, leaving behind only photographs and the impossible task of living up to a ghost. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Discuss your grades at dinner. No excuses. The Sterling Academy campus buzzed with the kind of energy that came from privilege and pressure. Students moved in designer uniforms, their conversations peppered with talk of summer homes in Aspen and internships at Fortune 500 companies. Isadora walked among them but felt invisible, the girl who had everything except the one thing that mattered in her father's world. Intelligence worthy of the Sterling name. Rough test yesterday, huh, Izzy? Connor McKinley, the dean's son, fell into step beside her. His smile was sympathetic, but she caught the pity in his eyes. Everyone knew she was struggling. In a school where academic excellence was assumed, failure was gossip. I'm fine, she lied, clutching her backpack tighter. Inside were 3 more failed assignments she hadn't shown her father yet. Each red mark felt like a stab wound to whatever was left of her self-worth. That afternoon, she sat in advanced physics, staring at equations that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Professor Williams droned on about momentum and energy, while Isadora's mind screamed with frustration. She understood the concepts when he explained them, but the moment she tried to solve a problem, everything scrambled. Miss Sterling, perhaps you'd like to solve this one? Professor Williams's voice cut through her fog. The whiteboard displayed a complex equation about projectile motion. 24 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the thunderous beating of her heart. She stood slowly, her legs shaking, and walked to the board. The marker felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her hand. She stared at the problem, the numbers swimming before her eyes like tadpoles in a pond. Somewhere behind her, someone snickered. Take your time, Professor Williams said, but his tone suggested his patience was already wearing thin. She wrote a number, erased it, wrote another. The snickering grew louder. I can't, she whispered, dropping the marker, clattered to the floor like thunder. Perhaps extra tutoring would help, Professor Williams said gently, but the words felt like a public execution. See me after class. She ran. Right out of the classroom, down the marble hallway, past the trophy cases filled with academic achievements she'd never earn. She didn't stop until she reached the library, that sanctuary of quiet where her failures felt less public. Meanwhile, in the basement maintenance room, Caspian Vance was changing into his cleaning uniform. The dark blue coveralls felt like armor, protection against a world that would judge him for what he appeared. He pulled on the bright yellow rubber gloves and checked his watch. 7 p.m. Time to begin the night shift that paid for his daughter's daycare and kept food on their small apartment table. Little Nora would be asleep by now, he thought, picturing his 4-year-old daughter curled up with her stuffed elephant, safely tucked away from the complexity of adult struggles. She was the reason he'd chosen invisibility over recognition, safety over acclaim. Caspian loaded his cart with supplies and began his rounds. He'd been cleaning Sterling Academy for 6 months, invisible to the students and faculty who saw only a janitor. They had no idea that the man mopping their floors had once stood at the front of lecture halls, explaining theoretical physics to doctoral candidates at Stanford. That was another life, he reminded himself as he pushed his cart toward the library. A life that had ended in flames and grief and a choice between his daughter's well-being and his own dreams. The library was usually empty by 7:30, but tonight he heard something unexpected, the sound of quiet sobbing. He found her at the far table, the Sterling girl, surrounded by textbooks and crumpled papers. Her shoulders shook with the kind of desperation he recognized all too well. She looked up when she heard his cart wheels, her eyes red and swollen. "Sorry," she whispered. "I'll leave if you need to clean." But Caspian's attention wasn't on her tears. It was on the physics textbook lying open in front of her, on the problem she'd been attempting to solve. He could see her work. Scattered, panicked, but not wrong. Just misdirected. "You're approaching it wrong," he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" He should have apologized, should have returned to his cleaning and maintained his cover. But something in her expression, the same desperate hunger for understanding he'd once felt as a struggling graduate student, made him continue. "That equation, you're trying to solve it like a math problem. But it's not math, it's architecture. It's a blueprint." He set down his supplies and moved closer, pointing to her notebook with a gloved finger. "Look at it this way, every number is a building block. Every variable is a room in a structure. You're not calculating, you're constructing." Isadora stared at the problem, then at him. "I don't understand." "Close your eyes," Caspian said gently. "Now imagine you're an architect. Someone gives you a foundation, that's your given information. Your job isn't to do math. It's to build something stable on top of that foundation." She closed her eyes, her breathing slowing. "Okay. Now open them and look at the problem again. Don't see numbers. See materials. See a blueprint of what you're building." Isadora looked down at the equation, and something shifted. The chaos of numbers began to organize itself into patterns, into structures. She picked up her pencil and began to write, not frantically this time, but with purpose. Step by step, the solution emerged. Not from memorized formulas or desperate guessing, but from understanding. From seeing the problem as something she could build rather than something she had to decode. I did it," she whispered, staring at the completed solution. "I actually did it." Caspian smiled, the first genuine smile he'd allowed himself in months. "You were always capable. You just needed to see it differently." "How do you know all this?" she asked, studying his face. "You're just a janitor," he finished, the familiar lie tasting bitter. "But I pay attention. I listen." That was the beginning. What started as one desperate moment became a nightly ritual. Every evening at 8 p.m., Isadora would arrive at the library, officially to study alone. Unofficially, to meet the janitor who was teaching her to see the world differently. "Think of calculus as the language of change," Caspian explained one evening, sketching diagrams on a napkin. "Every derivative is just asking, how is this thing changing at this exact moment? Like watching a flower bloom in slow motion." Isadora nodded, her notebook filling with insights that no expensive tutor had ever given her. "But why don't the other teachers explain it this way?" "Because they learned it as formulas," Caspian said. "They never had to struggle like you do. Sometimes the best teachers are those who've had to find their own way." Night after night, her understanding deepened. Chemistry became the story of how atoms formed relationships. History became the narrative of human decisions, creating ripple effects across time. Literature became the architecture of human emotion. "You're getting better," Caspian observed one evening, watching her work through a complex physics problem. "Your confidence is growing." "Because of you," she said, looking up from her work. "I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." Caspian felt a familiar ache in his chest, the ghost of the life he'd left behind. "Everyone deserves to understand their own brilliance," he said quietly. "Were you always a janitor?" she asked suddenly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Caspian's hands stilled on his cleaning supplies. For a moment, he was back in California, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in quantum mechanics equations, surrounded by eager doctoral students hanging on his every word. Dr. Caspian Vance, the youngest department head in Stanford's history. The memory felt like looking at someone else's life through glass. "No," he said finally, "I wasn't always a janitor." The story spilled out in fragments over the following weeks. How he'd been a theoretical physicist, published and respected, with a corner office and a research lab that was his kingdom. How he'd married his graduate school sweetheart, Elena, and how they'd planned a life filled with discovery and academic glory. How everything had changed on a rainy Tuesday morning when Elena's car had slid off a mountain road, leaving him alone with 4-year-old Nora and a grief so vast it swallowed his ambition whole. "I couldn't function," he told Isadora one evening as they sat in the quiet library. "Students would ask questions and I'd forget what I was teaching mid-sentence. I'd start research and find myself staring at Elena's empty coffee mug for hours." "So you left?" Isadora asked gently. "I left everything. The university, the research, the recognition. Packed up Nora and drove until we ran out of money in Texas." He smiled sadly. "Turns out broken dreams don't pay for daycare." "But you're brilliant," Isadora protested. "You could teach again, couldn't you?" Caspian shook his head. "Nora needs stability, not a father chasing ghosts. This job pays our bills, keeps us safe. Sometimes that's enough." But even as he said it, he felt something stirring inside him, a hunger he'd thought was dead. Teaching Isadora had awakened something he'd buried with Elena's memory. The joy of watching understanding dawn in someone's eyes, the satisfaction of unlocking a mind's potential. "Besides," he added, "who says I'm not teaching now?" Their lessons continued, growing more sophisticated as Isadora's confidence bloomed. She began solving problems that had stumped her for months, began speaking up in class, began carrying herself like someone who belonged in rooms filled with intelligence. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of revealing themselves. And in the Sterling household, where excellence was expected and failure was not tolerated, dramatic change rarely went unnoticed. Chief Sterling had begun to notice something different about his daughter. The report cards that had once arrived like death sentences now carried grades that made him blink twice to ensure he wasn't misreading. A- in physics, B+ in advanced calculus, a perfect score on a chemistry exam. "Margaret," he called to the housekeeper one evening, "has Isadora been receiving additional tutoring?" "Not that I'm aware of, sir. Though she has been spending more time at the library." Sterling frowned. His daughter's transformation was remarkable, but it was also suspicious. Sterling men didn't believe in miracles, they believed in explanations. And he intended to find one. The confrontation would come soon enough. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of the Sterling Academy Library, a broken physicist and a struggling heiress continued their clandestine lessons, neither knowing that their carefully guarded secret was about to collide with the unforgiving world of Texas wealth and power. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The surprise quiz landed on Isadora's desk like a thunderbolt on a clear morning. Professor Williams had announced it with barely concealed satisfaction, clearly expecting his struggling students to crumble under the pressure of unannounced testing. "Advanced quantum mechanics," he declared, distributing the papers with theatrical precision. No notes, no calculators, no mercy. Around her, Isadora heard the collective intake of breath that meant panic. Connor McKinley was already chewing his pencil eraser. Sarah Chun, the class valedictorian, looked genuinely worried for the first time all semester. But Isadora felt something she'd never experienced during a test: calm. She looked at the first problem, a complex wave function that would have sent her into hyperventilation just weeks ago. Now, she heard Caspian's voice in her mind: "Don't see math. See architecture." The equation transformed before her eyes. She saw the wave as a blueprint, the variables as building materials, the solution as a structure waiting to be constructed. Her pencil moved with confident strokes across the paper, building understanding step by step. 20 minutes later, she set down her pencil and looked around. Everyone else was still frantically calculating, erasing, recalculating. She'd finished first, something that had never happened in her academic life. Professor Williams collected the papers with his usual stern expression, but when he graded them that evening, his coffee mug slipped from his fingers and shattered on his office floor. Isadora Sterling had scored a perfect 100. The news spread through Sterling Academy like wildfire. Teachers whispered in hallways. Students stared openly. Dean Holloway called an emergency meeting with the physics department. "It's impossible," Professor Martinez from advanced chemistry insisted. The Sterling girl went from failing to perfect scores in 3 weeks. Nobody improves that fast without help. "What kind of help?" Dean Holloway asked, though his tone suggested he already had suspicions. "The kind that involves someone else taking the test," Professor Williams said grimly. "Or advanced knowledge of the questions." Within hours, the word had spread beyond academic circles. Whispers of cheating followed Isadora through the marble hallways. Students who had once pitied her now looked at her with suspicion and contempt. "I heard she paid someone to take her tests," one girl whispered loudly enough for Isadora to hear. "Or maybe Daddy bought her the answers," another added with a cruel laugh. The accusation stung worse than failure ever had. At least when she was failing, it was honest. Now her first taste of success was being poisoned by doubt. The call came to Chief Sterling's office at precisely 3:47 p.m. "Mr. Sterling, this is Dean Holloway at the Academy. I'm afraid we need to discuss your daughter's recent academic improvements." Sterling's jaw tightened as he listened to the accusations. Cheating. His daughter, a Sterling, accused of cheating. The family name, built on 3 generations of honest success, was being dragged through the mud by whispers and suspicions. "What evidence do you have?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The improvement is unprecedented, sir. Statistically impossible without external assistance. We're conducting a full investigation." After hanging up, Sterling sat in his executive chair, staring out at the Dallas skyline that bore his family's mark on a dozen gleaming buildings. The Sterling name meant integrity. It meant excellence achieved through hard work and natural ability. It did not mean cheating scandals and academic dishonor. That evening, he confronted Isadora in the mansion's library, a room filled with leather-bound books that seemed to judge her from their shelves. "Explain this to me," he said, sliding the dean's formal letter across the mahogany table. "Explain how my daughter went from academic mediocrity to perfect scores in 3 weeks." Isadora's hands trembled as she read the accusations. "I didn't cheat, Dad. I finally understand the material. I've been studying differently, seeing it in new ways. Don't lie to me. Sterling's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. The Sterling name has stood for integrity for 60 years. I will not let you destroy it with some pathetic cheating scandal. I'm not lying. Isadora stood, her voice rising with desperation. I can prove it. Give me any problem, any test. Enough. Sterling turned toward the window, his back rigid with disappointment. I'm withdrawing you from the academy. We'll say it's for health reasons. Better than having you expelled for cheating. The words hit Isadora like physical blows. You're giving up on me? Just like that. I'm protecting our family's reputation. Something you should have considered before you decided to cheat your way to success. I didn't cheat. The scream tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Why won't you believe me? Why won't anyone believe me? But Sterling had already left the room, leaving her alone with her tears and the crushing weight of being punished for finally succeeding. That night, Isadora fled to the library at Sterling Academy. She needed to see Caspian, needed someone who understood, someone who believed in her abilities. The building was dark except for the security lights, but she knew how to get in. Months of evening study sessions had taught her which doors the night custodian left unlocked. She found him in the main library, methodically shelving books that careless students had left scattered. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and his face immediately showed concern at her tear-streaked appearance. They think I cheated, she whispered, collapsing into a chair. Everyone thinks I cheated. My father is withdrawing me from school. Caspian set down his books and sat across from her. Tell me what happened. Through broken sobs, she explained the perfect test score, the accusations, her father's ultimatum. He doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm a liar and a cheater. You're neither, Caspian said firmly. You're brilliant. You just needed to see your own potential. It doesn't matter now. It's over. Caspian was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with a decision that would change everything. Finally, he stood and walked to the whiteboard that dominated the library's study area. Prove it, he said, picking up a marker. What? Prove you didn't cheat. Solve this. He began writing on the board, a complex physics problem that combined quantum mechanics, calculus, and theoretical applications. It was graduate-level work, far beyond anything taught at Sterling Academy. Isadora stared at the problem, her mind automatically shifting into the architectural thinking Caspian had taught her. She saw the structure, the building blocks, the blueprint of the solution. She walked to the board and began to work, her movements confident and precise. That's when the library lights suddenly blazed on. What is going on here? Chief Sterling stood in the doorway, flanked by Dean Holloway and a security guard. His face was a mask of fury and confusion as he took in the scene. His daughter at a whiteboard covered in complex equations, and a janitor watching her work. Isadora! Sterling's voice boomed across the library. Step away from him immediately. Dad, wait. You! Sterling pointed at Caspian. Security, call the police. This man has been manipulating my daughter, probably giving her test answers, taking advantage of a vulnerable student. No! Isadora moved between them. He didn't give me answers. He taught me how to find them myself. Don't be naive, Isadora. This man is a predator who... This man, Caspian interrupted quietly, is Dr. Caspian Vance, former head of theoretical physics at Stanford University. The library fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Sterling's face went white. That's impossible, Dean Holloway whispered. Dr. Vance disappeared years ago after. He stopped, his eyes widening with recognition. After my wife died, Caspian finished. After I chose my daughter's well-being over my career. Sterling stared at him, his mind racing. You're Caspian Vance. The quantum mechanics papers. The breakthrough research on wave-particle duality. I was. Caspian's voice carried the weight of grief and sacrifice. Now I'm a janitor who happened to recognize genius when I saw it being wasted. He turned to face Sterling directly. Your daughter isn't a cheater, Mr. Sterling. She's brilliant, but she learns differently than most people. She needs to see concepts as structures, as blueprints. Once I taught her that language, her mind unlocked itself. You've been tutoring her illegally. I've been watching a young woman torture herself over her supposed failures, Caspian said, his voice growing stronger. I've been seeing someone with extraordinary potential convinced she was worthless because nobody took the time to teach her in a way she could understand. Isadora stepped forward, her voice clear and steady for the first time in weeks. Dad, look at the board. Really look at it. That's graduate-level physics. I solved it myself right now in front of you. No cheating. No help. Just the understanding that Dr. Vance helped me develop. Sterling looked at the whiteboard, at the complex equations his daughter had solved with apparent ease. His face showed a war between pride, confusion, and the slow dawning of understanding. How long? He asked quietly. 6 weeks, Isadora answered. 6 weeks of learning to see my own mind differently. Dean Halloway cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling, if Dr. Vance has been providing unauthorized tutoring that transformed my daughter from a failing student into this? Sterling gestured toward the whiteboard. Dean Halloway, I think we need to have a conversation about what constitutes appropriate education. The silence stretched until Sterling finally spoke again, his voice heavy with realization. I owe you an apology, Isadora. Both of you. But Caspian shook his head. You owe her more than an apology, Mr. Sterling. You owe her the chance to prove what she's truly capable of. The Texas State Academic Championship had been Sterling Academy's white whale for 7 years. Always close, never victorious. When Isadora volunteered to represent the school in the individual competition, the faculty response ranged from skeptical to openly dismissive. She's improved, certainly, Professor Williams admitted during the faculty meeting. But state championship level? Against students from specialized magnet schools? Chief Sterling, however, had seen something in his daughter's eyes that he'd missed for 17 years. Confidence backed by genuine understanding. She competes, he declared. And she competes with the full support of Sterling Academy. The championship was held at the University of Texas, in an auditorium filled with the state's brightest high school students. Isadora sat among them, no longer the failing daughter of a billionaire, but a young woman who had learned to trust her own brilliance. The problems ranged across every subject: advanced mathematics, theoretical physics, organic chemistry, literature analysis. One by one, competitors fell away as the questions grew more challenging. In the audience, Caspian sat beside Chief Sterling, both men watching with nervous pride as Isadora worked through problems that would challenge graduate students. She sees it, Caspian murmured as Isadora tackled a quantum mechanics problem. Look at how she approaches it. She's building the solution like an architect. Sterling nodded, finally understanding what his daughter had tried to tell him. You gave her a gift. No, Caspian replied. I just helped her unwrap the gift she already had. When the final scores were announced, Isadora Sterling stood alone at the top. First place, by a margin that left the academic community stunned and scrambling for explanations. But the biggest change came 3 weeks later, when Chief Sterling made an announcement that sent shockwaves through both the business and academic worlds. Sterling Academy is pleased to announce the appointment of Dr. Caspian Vance as our new Dean of Sciences, he declared at a press conference, with Isadora beaming beside him. Dr. Vance will be developing innovative teaching methodologies that recognize and nurture different types of genius. The first student enrolled in Dr. Vance's new program was his own daughter, Nora, now starting kindergarten with the security of knowing her father had chosen both his dreams and her well-being. That evening, in the Sterling Mansion's library, 3 people sat together planning the future of education. A billionaire who had learned that success couldn't be bought, only nurtured. A genius who had discovered that teaching was his truest calling. And a young woman who had finally learned to see her own brilliance. So what's next? Chief Sterling asked, reviewing architectural plans for the new advanced learning center they were building. Isadora smiled, her eyes bright with possibilities. We change how the world thinks about intelligence. We make sure no student ever has to feel worthless because they learn differently. Caspian nodded, his hand resting on blueprints that would become classrooms designed for visual learners, kinesthetic learners, students who needed to build understanding rather than memorize formulas. We make sure, he said quietly, that every brilliant mind gets the chance to shine. Outside, the Texas sky stretched endlessly, full of stars and possibilities, while inside, 3 people who had learned that the greatest wealth was understanding continued planning a revolution in how the world would teach its children. The Sterling legacy had found its true meaning at last. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going.